A new piece in the Federalist argues that by choosing Kamala Harris as his running mate, Joe Biden has established the ascendance of Wall Street Democrats over working-class Americans, signaling the future of the party will cater to a Harris-Buttigieg-style corporate agenda. Love that.
Sounds familiar. Lawyer, senior contributor to the Federalist and co-host of the Conservative Minds podcast, Kyle Sammin. He's here to explain how Harris became this new voice of a new type of liberalism. It's good to see you, Kyle. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Kyle, just lay out a little bit of your argument from the piece. Obviously, Crystal and I generally agree. We've said it here many times. What is like the metapolitical analysis that you see that emanates from that Harris pick?
Well, I think Harris is sort of representative of a rise of, like you said, Wall Street and Hollywood and Silicon Valley Democrats. People who, in the early days of the Democratic Party, in the Depression, for instance, and in the years since then, Democrats became identified as the party of working people. And that lasted for a long time. The work FDR did in laying that groundwork is, carried through to generations of voters. But since that time, you don't hear Democrats talking as much about those farmers and laborers and the sort of people that used to make up the heart of that party. Biden still kind of does. He's good, like Bill Clinton was, at talking to all sorts of different people. But Harris really doesn't bring them up. Her focus is less about jobs and job security and neighborhoods and more about these broader issues of intersectionality and identity politics, which she sort of has as a substitute for what used to be the economic backbone of her party.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let me play devil's advocate here. You know where I stand on these issues. But the argument on the other side would be, look, Kamala Harris in the Senate has, lined up behind a lot of progressive initiatives, a lot of pro-union legislation, supported Medicare for all. You can tell how much I don't believe this argument that I'm making myself. But, why are you leaving that part out? And she also took on the big banks. This is also her narrative when she was California AG. Of course, she also let Steve Mnuchin off the hook while she was there as well. But what do you make of that counter argument that, in fact, she has been focused on those issues? If you look at her record, if you look at the way she's voted, you'll see a very different story.
Well, I think the Mnuchin point really sort of nails it. She talks a good game about going after big banks, but most of the people she put in jail were regular folks for minor crimes, not bankers. Mm-hmm. So what also is, if she's working for things that sound like progressive agendas, like pro-union things and environmentalism and workplace safety rules, that sounds good. But when you also work for free trade, all that does is make a further disadvantage to those American companies that follow the law like they're supposed to. So if she's working for what sounds like a progressive agenda, but not doing anything to backstop it with protection against labor from countries that don't follow those rules or don't even have those rules, it's hard to call that progressive. It looks progressive and it smells progressive, but it's not actually helping workers, which used to be the backbone of progressivism.
Right. And Kyle, what do you make then of the RNC so far? And, I think you and I probably share a different vision. The same vision around where the GOP kind of should go. But it's been a mixed bag, really, in terms of kind of fill in that gap and work towards a more working class agenda. What do you think that they should be doing? And maybe what are some of the things that they have done right?
Well, I think what helped Trump in 2016 was just the way he talked about these issues. And, if you look at his political ideas in public life, a lot of them changed over the years. The one thing that he was consistent about was trade protection. And, in the 80s, it was about Japan. Now it's about China and Mexico. But he has always, that's the one issue on which you really couldn't say he's a flip-flopper. Now, since he's been in office, he's done a lot of temporary tariffs. But I think if the RNC wanted to really get this message across as a permanent agenda, they need to start talking about legislation, which is something that Congress doesn't do that much of anymore, but it's what it's supposed to do. And that's how you would actually put some of these ideas and feelings into law. That would be a great way for them to bring this message home to working families across the country, saying, look, we're actually doing something. We're not just pounding the pulpit and saying we're going to make America great again. Here's something we're actually doing. So I think that would have been a better thing to do over the past 4 years. And maybe it's too late now, but he could at least, I think, propose some things like that. I think that would have helped make the RNC more of a real statement on that agenda.
Considering especially the moment that we're in right now, which really calls for some assertive, muscular federal government action to get past the pandemic, to pull us out, of this economic recession, it has been an almost completely policy-free campaign all the way around, which is just a remarkable kind of statement on how personality-driven our politics has become. But I wanted to pick up on something that you said about Joe Biden, which I think is interesting. You said, in contrast to Kamala Harris, he actually at least still uses the language of talking about the working class and the middle class and his own experience and growing up in Scranton and these sorts of things. How much do you think that matters? Because part of the problem with Hillary Clinton was not just that she was out of step on the policy agenda, that she was emblematic of this sort of status quo politics, which Joe Biden is also very emblematic of this sort of status quo politics. But people perceived a level of contempt coming from her towards the working class, and especially the white working class citizens of the country. And so when she made that comment about deplorables, it landed, and also one, by the way, about coal miners that maybe got circulated just as much as the deplorables one. It landed because it confirmed what people already suspected of her. Joe Biden doesn't have that same energy. His agenda has been disastrous for working people. I think all three of us agree on that, on the substance. But in terms of the affect, he channels this affable, middle-class Joe, seeing people as human beings kind of vibe. I truly don't think that he looks down his nose at other citizens. Does that make a big difference for him ultimately electorally?
I think a lot of people do vote based on that. I mean, there's a feeling, and then there's, like you said, there's things that come afterwards that confirm that feeling. I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter what his actual background is. I mean, Joe Biden's dad and grandfather were oil executives, and his family had some ups and downs since then. But FDR was also an American aristocrat, but he knew how to talk to people of every class, and that's sort of where it comes from. Trump's also obviously very rich, but he talked in a language that people felt understood them and felt like he wasn't talking down to them. I think that helps Biden a lot. I think he's affable. He's charming in his way. I mean, he says some weird stuff sometimes, but that's also part of talking like a regular person, as we see with Trump. He says some weird stuff sometimes too.
Yeah.
I think that helps. I think a lot of, we write and talk about a lot of larger ideas and trends and philosophies, but a lot of times what you're really getting is, does this person understand me? Is this person going to help me? Is he out to get me? Does he like people like me? Does he even understand people like me? And Biden is good at that. I think a lot better than Clinton was.
I think that's right. All right, Kyle, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Great to have you, Kyle. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.